Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren. I'm here with the Grugq for another Between Two Nerds discussion. G'day Grugq, how are you?
G'day Tom, fine and yourself?
I'm good. This week's episode is brought to you by Push Security. They make an in-browser agent that makes sure that your corporate identities don't end up being sprayed all over the place by accident. Check them out at pushsecurity.com. So this week, Grugq, there was this fascinating report from The Insider, which is a magazine, newspaper that looks at what goes on in Russia. And this article was written by Grugq, Roman Dobrokotov, and Michael Weiss. And I'm familiar with Grugq. He used to be at Bellingcat. Mm-hmm. And so Bellingcat does these huge deep dive investigative open source reports. So famously, they tied the poisoning of Sergei Skripal, who was a former KGB spy who had defected to the UK. He was poisoned at home in Salisbury with a nerve agent, and Bellingcat tied that attempted assassination to Russian intelligence. Specifically, this unit known as Unit 29155. So it's Russian military intelligence, the GRU, and it's
two innocent GRU agents who happened to be in Salisbury to look at the cathedral tower. That's coincidentally at the same time as they went to visit Skripal at home, and he wasn't there.
I mean, those poor GRU agents. So that unit, which I hadn't heard of until that incident. Mm-hmm. So Grugq was involved in the work that unraveled that. So the Insider did a deep dive into how Unit 29155 got into cyber operations. So in recent times, there's been more reporting about how they're doing cyber stuff. And to me, it was always entirely a mystery. How does a group of essentially thugs, like the type of people who would do sabotage operations and assassinations, are not
blowing up
are not your typical keyboard warrior?
Yeah. Those are not usually two things that go together. It tracks people down and murders them, and also makes up stuff on the internet and lies on Twitter. Like those. I mean, I guess if you're killing people, you're not above lying on Twitter, but it doesn't seem necessarily like.
Yeah. And so even in Mission Impossible, they've got the Tom Cruise character, what's his name? Ethan Hunt, who does all the stunts. He's a good version of Unit 29155. And then they've got the hacker type, Simon Pegg, who does all the hacking stuff. They're two different people. And there's a reason that they're two different people. And so I guess we'd talk a bit about this article and look at what it tells us about Russian cyber organization and culture.
Right. So I'm just thinking, does this mean that if you're a hacking unit, a cyber unit in GRU, do you suddenly expand into assassinations as a side hustle?
Well, there's a mystery here. The article, I think, first of all, it's fascinating that it talks about what type of information they based it on. So let me just find it. The Insider has spent a year investigating the hackers of Unit 29155, relying on a trove of leaked emails, social media posts, phone records, and crucially, unprotected server logs and left behind burner emails and disused VK and Twitter accounts. It's just like, it wasn't burn after reading just so much as just leave it lying around after we're finished.
Like, you can find articles talking about how bad using email for CovCom, for covert communication. Like these go back 20 years. You can find articles saying like, do not use like an email account for CovCom. I mean, some of the stuff that struck me was that they had these VK accounts, which was that's the Russian Facebook, So they were using VK accounts and they were just messaging each other reports. Like they were, these were like operational reports of their activities being sent over VK Messenger. Like,
and then they didn't even bother they
didn't even delete the logs. They just
left them there. So I think that's fantastic that they just leave that behind. It's so good, where good is bad. And it seems that the hacker number one, patient zero, I guess, for 29155 when it comes to hacking was just a cyber criminal. And it's not really clear how he ends up there. I can only assume that the boss of the unit at the time just decided that we'll get into this line of business. We'll get into hacking. And the criminal is Tim Stiegel. So he's an ethnic Chechen. So I'm probably totally pronouncing his name wrong. But he had been a cyber criminal for some time. And then all of a sudden he just ends up in the GRU.
Like there's definitely something missing there.
Yes.
Like there's a very clear step two that's not...
like the whole article's great. It's got a whole lot of color. Apparently Stiegel has a still active finance blog. So he's an active blogger writing about finance. And then, so this is back in around 2014, I think. And he joins the GRU. They've actually got some of the ID cards that he used around that time under different names. And he traveled to different countries under this false identity. It's not clear why a hacker needs to travel. Like there have been cases where the GRU or Russian intelligence has done close access operations, trying to intercept off Wi-Fi or gain access through Wi-Fi, so who knows. And then he's involved in a series of hack and leak operations. So one of them is the compromise of Qatar's state bank. Is it Qatar or Qatar?
Qatar. According to the Qataris.
Okay. And
that's what they said when I was there, so I mean, that's all I know. Okay.
Yeah. So the motivation there was that the Qatari royal family was supporting the rebel groups opposed to the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. And Stiegel stole data from the bank, and then he pulled out the dealings of the Qatari royal family. I think you've spoken about this before, where you can't just take a dump of data and then put it on the internet and then, journalists will go and do a wonderful job. It appears that he actually took, it says 1.5 gigabytes of data, leaked it, all of it online, and structured the dump in such a way as to draw the focus to the financial dealings of the Qatari royal family and their government's intelligence operations. So that seems like, actually, that's probably like a job well done. I've never heard of this hack or this leak before, so I don't know whether that tells you whether it was successful or not.
It's news to me, so I think it made a big splash at the time, since neither of us have heard of it until we read this article.
And so this was that was done as a false flag operation, so they claimed that Turkish hackers did it. Anyway, so there's a number of hack and leak style operations. I can only assume that the boss of the unit at the time said, hack and leak, here's something that we can get into, and let's grab this Stiegel guy and have at it. And so they do a number of those types of operations. Stiegel's allowed to recruit other criminals.
So I was just going to say, the screenshot they have here of the tweet from when they were doing the Twitter false flags is obviously stolen from one of these internal reports, because the pinned tweet is the one that was being used to sort of instigate unrest. And you could see it was pinned 25 seconds before the photo was taken. And it's a picture of a screen. It's not an actual screenshot, right?
Yep.
So this is absolutely one of their reports. Like, look at this thing that I put out.
Yep.
They have 9 followers.
Yeah, so I think the insider says that they found a disused server that had several different 29155 reports of what they'd been doing. It's like just mind-blowing.
I feel like there's a lot of... And did this fall... The server fell off the back of a truck? Is that what happened?
It's never quite clear how they get the information.
I mean, it's clear, but it's just not... I think we can all figure out what happened.
One paragraph that speaks to that is... The insider recovered it from text files sent between and among the hackers via a left-behind email address that was used to register a burner account on vKontakte, VK, Russia's Facebook equivalent. The email and the vKontakte direct messages were apparently used by members of Unit 29155 for reporting purposes. It's just...
I mean, that mirrors the ASD thing of using Gmail for all of their operational reporting, and it's shocking that the sort of thing that you'd set up between an agent and an officer for control, and this would be like, are we still meeting on Tuesday? Yes, which would mean that the meeting for Thursday morning is still on.
Yep.
Right. You would never use it internally because you'd use internal tools which are secure.
Yes. I mean, it's mind-boggling. Now, I was wondering if this tells us that because 29155 is not a traditional hacking type outfit, they don't have the same OPSEC culture as the other GRU hacking, the true GRU hacking teams.
Yeah, like the pedigree doesn't seem to be intelligence work. Right, like the hacking was built up from a criminal who brought in other people, and his era of criming was pre-crackdown. Like, it seems that he comes from an era of a lot more laid back OPSEC because it just didn't matter.
Yep, and that's what a criminal would do. They would use VK and direct messages and whatever.
Right. Yeah, and so it just. When they are learning to do stuff, they're learning from this guy who's got these old bad habits. But I think one of the other things that it suggests is that they're not in the office, right? If you're in the office, then you can use the internal secure mail and the internal secure messenger and, the phone lines and stuff like that. There's ways of doing secure stuff. But if you're outside of the office, maybe accessing that is a lot more painful and difficult. And so you would find secure enough solutions.
Yeah, so it seems like there was Stigl, then he recruited two other former criminals, and that seems to have kicked along for a while. And then whatever it is they were doing was successful enough that they then started recruiting young people from capture the flag competitions. So I think it's interesting that even though there's nothing in here that we can see that strikes us as particularly a win, they were able to sell it internally as we want more.
Yeah, I mean, they mentioned one of the things that was viewed as a huge success. It was an info op of some sort.
So there is this part where it says internal chats seen by the insider, like incredible, show that Unit 29155 considered its Biolabs series to be the crown jewel of its cyber information operations. The series was used to justify tens of millions of dollars in additional state funding for Unit 29155. So that's
then spent on more VK accounts.
So
upgrading to premium on Twitter.
So they recruited a Bulgarian journalist who became a kind of cutout and would report basically conspiracy theory stuff. Her reporting became the bedrock of official Russian government claims about malign US scientific research into infectious diseases, all in the lead up to the 2020 COVID pandemic. So the GRU creates the lie, it's amplified by this journalist, it's picked up by Russian officials, and then it becomes a sort of self-licking ice cream.
Yep.
And I guess, of course, COVID feeds into that. So that seems to be the single operation that actually justified
all the other stuff. very long ago when I worked at a startup, the CEO was this ex-salesman. He was telling me that one of the ways that sales groups would work is that, like, whenever a particularly lucrative contract was finally signed and there's going to be this big commission, they'd go and they'd pull out all of the expense reports that they hadn't submitted yet that were particularly dodgy that they would then start attaching to this one sale. Dinner for 3 at, like, some very expensive place, golfing trip, helicopter ride with whatever. And you start just assigning them to, like, this one account so that you can submit everything and get it approved. And it feels very much like that they had this one thing luckily came through. And so now they're
right. Yes.
They're all sort of hanging off the back of this,
Yeah. So on one level, this part is speculation that the boss wanted to get into Hack and Leak. Mm-hmm. These series of operations that we've never heard of. One that is probably boosted by the arrival of COVID-19, like a 1 in 100-year pandemic.
The secret to information operations and comedy is timing.
So what I like about it is that they've got the, whatever the Russian word for chutzpah is, to just go and do things and try it out.
Yeah.
And that is entrepreneurial, it's innovative. I don't know if I've told this story, but once when I was working in defense, I went to my boss and I said to her, I want to try and do this thing. And she was like, what's it going to get us? And I was like, I don't know, but I know it's going to be great. And she accepted my word on that. And it feels like the Russians are operating
that's just their default.
Yeah, that's right. Now, some of the stuff later on talks about how Stiegel retires or removed or has health problems and resigns. He gets replaced by this guy called Roman Puntis. And Puntis leads the hacking team, but it says he had little understanding of IT and relied heavily on his subordinates. He also appeared more interested in his personal pursuits than in winning the war. So this is like during the war in Ukraine.
Every IT boss ever. You've got the guy who founds it, who sets the whole thing up, and it's going really great, and he retires, and they bring in, like, the corporate guy who's the safe manager that, is a friend of the board, and he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just taking a paycheck. Basically, that's what it looks like. It's a traditional takeover.
Yeah. And to me, it speaks to, like, you just do whatever you feel like. And so the previous boss was Stiegel, you go and do this thing. He's given a fair bit of autonomy. He's the operations, like, you can see how they are at least intended to align with Russian interests. Mm-hmm. Whereas this guy is just like, whatever. So.
Yeah. But they align with Russian interests, but they're also sort of cheap and easy.
Yeah.
Like they're not Operation Olympic Games, right? Like they're not dark energy. They're not these big.
So Olympic Games, that's the one that was reported by the New York Times guy, David Sanger, right? And his reporting is that the US had a whole lot of operations prepared to disrupt, I think it was Iranian infrastructure in the event that there was a military confrontation was necessary. And the depiction in the book is that it was a whole series of things that would really have crippled Iran. Who knows, of course. But big picture, cyber Pearl Harbor kind of stuff.
Right. And dark energy, like they go and they take out, like they spend months learning how the Ukrainian electrical infrastructure works, and then they disrupt it and knock out the electricity. Like it's a big thing with heavy investment. He's big on, like, Twitter accounts and hack and leak. So I think they're using this journalist as a cutout, but also she's doing the work that they couldn't do. Right. Like they could get the data, but they couldn't craft a story, a narrative that they could then sort of feed into the information ecosystem and sort of hope that it grows legs. Whereas that's the thing that she can do. She can take this and she can turn it into an actual story. So rather than a dump of, the bank files.
Right,
It would be, here is a corruption scandal as revealed by these bank files, or here is some sort of scandalous thing supported by this data.
Yep,
Right.
yep. So one of the projects that the Insider uncovers, the internal 29155 report is called Graffiti in Cities.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke with Patrick about this briefly, and basically they just recruited people online to go around and do graffiti in Ukrainian cities. They were paying them like between $1 and $5 for the graffiti, depending upon the importance and the risk involved in marking a certain location. The assets were also required to report their walking routes and the number of steps walked per day.
So,
It's like your first newspaper job.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, there's a bunch of people who have now been done for Russian sabotage.
Yep.
And they've been caught pretty much the same way. Like, these are...
Yeah, the technique has been applied to much more serious things.
Right. So there'll be things where there's like basically low-level criminals who just don't want to get a job or can't get a job, or for whatever reason they need to make money and they're looking for something that they can do that will pay well, that's not too hard, and they'll look online and there'll be these offers of like, here's $5 to spray paint some graffiti, and like, yeah. So if you do like 20 of those, that's $100. It's got to be, like, that's good money. You could probably do that in an evening.
Yeah. So there is a story here about a particular firebombing where it looks like they paid a Ukrainian to go and throw a Molotov cocktail at a particular person's house. Mm-hmm. $7,000. So that is a hell of a lot cheaper than actually getting a real agent that you spent hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars training and false IDs and...
infiltrating into the country, putting him at risk of being arrested, I mean, I like this. They didn't even pay the $7,000. He was only promised
it. He was promised. Never actually delivered.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way to do it. Like, what's he going to do? Complain to Telegram? I was cheated. Yeah.
Yeah, so part of the work involved there was actually tracking down the address of the target, who was a government official. And so apparently they had... there was lots of officials with same or similar names. So they didn't actually know where this particular person
More
lived.
than one Igor is what you're saying.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is interesting in that they had... It seems like not that good an idea, like graffiti. But the techniques that went into that, executing that, like they've learnt by doing, and they can actually repurpose them to do things that seem to me would be a lot more impactful.
Right. But I mean, it hasn't been one-sided, because there's also people in Russia who are getting paid to do things like park an electric scooter next to the foyer at an apartment, and it'll contain basically a claymore mine that kills a GRU kernel or whatever.
Right.
What's curious is that this has actually been a huge thing in Japan. There are, they're not exactly crime syndicates. I don't remember what it's called, but basically the way that it works is essentially you sign up with the same sort of thing, like carry a bag from point A to point B, but it'll be full of drugs. Or get a car and wait on this corner at 4 p.m. tomorrow. 3 men will get in, and you need to drive them where they want to go. Right? And you're the getaway driver for a bank heist.
So it's like Airtasker for crime.
Yeah, but like there's been big scandals, and like there's a guy who got done because he organized like jewelry robberies where he'd basically be like, this is a very easy task. All you need is a hammer, a ski mask, and a backpack. Right. And then he'd send like 4 guys who didn't know each other because they'd all met up wearing ski masks, who'd all been signed up for this job. They'd show up, they'd smash and grab at a jewelry store. hand off to someone else, and they'd get paid for it. And then they'd all get busted because, that's what happens when you drive your car to a jewelry store. And he wouldn't, because he'd only spoken to them via Telegram or whatever, or online messenger. And the whole thing became a huge scandal when there was actually a murder that was done. They'd hired a guy to kill someone. And all these other dudes were like, I only drove the car. I'm like, I only helped get her into the car. Like,
Yep.
I didn't actually strangle her. That's him. I didn't know what was going on. So, but that's a whole subculture that exists in Japan where that's what they actively do. So I don't know if that was inspiration for this, or it's parallel, like convergent evolution.
Yeah, from the perspective of a intelligence agency, that seems like an innovative thing to do. If you come from a culture of secrecy and not telling people what you're trying to do, like you don't trust random people with your sabotage.
You don't go to the co-op market and put up a little an index card
right.
on the board.
Yeah. Yeah, but when you are thinking of the modern day world, it's like, well, of course, that's what people are going to do. Yeah, so I guess it seems like they've got this culture of whatever goes. They set up these small teams that don't seem to talk to anyone else within GRU. Like there doesn't seem to be any deconfliction. I mean, maybe there is, but
it's more of a cell structure in a way than an organization, right? Where you've got these independent units that are sort of like they're completely self-contained. They don't seem to coordinate with others. They do their own operations internally.
Yeah. In that operation with the Bulgarian journalist, I think it was just Stigl by himself. He was messaging the journalist. He was doing, I don't know if there was any hacking involved. There was hacking at times. So it seemed like he was doing it all.
Yeah. So one of the other ways that I think we can see the internal structure of FSB and GRU is this report from the Ukraine CERT from, I think, the first half of 2023.
Right.
And they've got this matrix which shows the first 6 months, and they've broken it out by each week. So across the top, they've got each week, and then down the left-hand side, they have every single group that they're tracking.
Yep.
And then they have this heat map which shows sort of how many operations per week are being detected from this particular group.
Yep.
It shows in a way how there are these new groups being stood up to do things. Like you don't have like the hacker group that gets assigned tasks. You've got people doing this
I
one
described
thing.
like ASD and NSA as like factories where they've got pipelines, but that way of working is totally different. It's like just small teams. Yeah. And I guess what's
sort of tradecraft in a way, right? It's sort of like the skilled... It's
artisanal.
Pre-industrial. Artisanal. Yeah, there we go.
Artisanal cyber espionage as opposed to industrial scale cyber
handcrafted
espionage.
with love, the way it should be. Just, it's none of your factory espionage, that That's sort of soulless... big corporation.
Yeah, so I mean that seriously does have advantages in that it enables you to be very flexible, enables you to focus on things that are important at the time.
Right. And it also gives you a lot of initiative, right?
Yep.
Because you've got all of these different teams doing creative things. And they're going to screw up sometimes, but they're also going to get unexpected wins.
Yeah. So I'm looking at that table and there's 30, 40 different groups?
Yeah.
Like a lot of them. And so in ASD, we would try and have our factory and also have small teams as well. But they were very few of them because they were supported by a high priority from the director. And so that's kind of a mixed model where you do your factory and you also pick out a few things, a few little operations that you think are important enough that you can pull people out. Whereas this is the exact opposite.
Yeah, but I think we can look at the other side as well, which is that one of the strengths of this is that you get the sort of handcrafted, artisanal, dedicated, flexible, high initiative, but limited resources, I think, is the downside. right? Like there's an inherent limit on how much you can do with a team of 5 people who are not supported by a large organization as part of that same project.
Right.
Like this group, this 21955, they're not doing these big operations. They're doing these hack and leaks. They're doing Twitter accounts. They're supporting one single journalist who becomes their only point of access for leaking information, right? They don't have a wide and diverse web. I mean, they're just using Novichok to kill people. It's pathetic.
One thing I was thinking about was around the time of the DNC hacks. So Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, John Podesta, was hacked. It wasn't by this unit, but they had also, I think they used a bit shortening service as part of their tradecraft, but then they'd left the bit shortening service open, I think is my recollection. So again, poor tradecraft. And it showed that they'd hacked thousands of people. Now I'm thinking about thousands of people sounds like a lot, but actually when you're a hacker team, it's not that many, right? So is that maybe still also a small team just operating on themselves doing the email hacking stuff?
And I mean, it's not thousands of people in one day.
No.
Right? This is over a time period, so it's not all that many.
I don't know if it was successful hacks. I think it was the target list.
Right. Yeah. Well, like one single person working as an access agent for a ransomware team will attack 10,000 people in a day and expect 2 or 3 hits. So I was going to say one of the downsides of cells, and I think you touched on it when you were talking about bad tradecraft, is that it's very difficult to disseminate best practices.
Right.
Because you have, assuming that there's no competition between groups at all, right? That they're completely friendly, that they're willing to share everything that they have. If they've got a successful technique, they're going to share it with everyone else so they can all get better. Even with that, it's very, very hard to do because if you're in different teams, you don't cross-train, right?
There's no weekly stand-up meeting and they're on different Slacks and
different VK groups.
That's right.
Assuming that there's no competition between groups, it's still hard to do. And I'm not sure that's a safe assumption. Like, I think that there's probably some level of competition and some, like, we figured out a way of doing things that was working well for us. Let's keep doing this because then we can get all the benefits and bonuses and promotions and all that stuff rather than sharing it with everyone else.
So what you say actually makes a lot of sense, small groups. But the article, going back to that, doesn't give me the sense that they're necessarily working towards a common goal or have incentives to learn from each other, in the sense that there's a whole section that talks about the current leader of the hacking unit in 29155 is basically just feathering his own nest. So he's setting up
in the
front
GRU?
companies.
My
Yeah. And so it's the incentive seems to be to give the impression that you're doing well enough. But there's it doesn't seem that there's a driver to improve because, all these operations get busted. Most of them are failures, yet the hacking team still grows in size. Like it's the one in 50 operations that kind of justifies the rest. And like some of the stuff is that he creates a front company to funnel money from the GRU to his mistress. That's
an appropriate use of state funds. I mean,
whereas for a terrorist network, the incentive to improve your OPSEC is you get captured or killed.
Jail, right? And
like
similarly,
a very strong driver.
Right, and also the other thing with the terrorist network is the reason to be a terrorist is that you have a strong belief in a vision. Right, like you're doing this thing to achieve something, right? Like you don't do it just because, like, you were hanging out on a Friday night with the boys and we decided to go and, do car bombs. Like it's not a thing that you just do casually because the repercussions are so high. And also the steps that you have to kill people. Like you have to do these very transgressive things that a lot of human beings don't want to do by default, right? So you need to have a strong moral conviction that what you're doing is worth the cost. Like, it's for a greater good, so it's okay to do this. It doesn't seem like these, like maybe Stigl had that going on, but I don't think Roman, what's it?
Puntus.
Yeah, so I don't think Roman Puntus is necessarily on board in the same way. I mean, look, he does have his mistress getting paid, but she was also working on a PowerPoint slide for the group. So I think, she's sort of part of the team if you think about it. She's sort of she's a worker, right? It's
So there's a paragraph here. He sets up his mistress as an employee or a contractor for 29155. Puntus was able to use his position as the head of Unit 29155 Cyber Department to give his second family their own corporate entity, which received GRU funds earmarked for setting up the digital infrastructure necessary to engage in more hacking. And so, like, the incentive to actually improve things, zero, I think. In a nutshell, it seems like the original boss of 29155 just liked the idea of hack and leak, is my assumption. Got Stigl. Stigl recruited some other cyber criminals, and they did like stuff.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's consistent with the Russian cyber or GRU culture or hacker culture of small cells. And they did that. Stigl's retired. The new boss of the hacking unit just doesn't care about hacking and is really just out for himself. And there's this great paragraph. The married GRU boss's affair, this is Puntus, was not his first extramarital escapade by far. In fact, Roman Puntus's work phone number, registered in the cover identity of Roman Panov, is listed as a regular contact with more than 7 VIP escorts in Moscow. This can be seen from Russian phone sharing apps. Like, this whole sentence doesn't make sense to me. Like, you're using your work phone to contact escorts.
You don't want your wife to see it. You wouldn't use your personal phone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
One of the descriptions of Puntus in one prostitute's phone book is military but generous. Drives you home in his Chevrolet.
Great cover, excellent, excellent job not letting everyone know that you're military intelligence.
And so that kind of anecdote right at the end of the piece kind of makes everything else make sense, in that it's just, anything goes, whatever. Everyone's out for themselves.
Yeah. It does feel like there's this early boss who goes like, let's do some hack and leak. That sounds good. Like, everyone else is doing it. Let's get into cyber. That's going to be a growth industry for us. I'll get a promotion. We'll get some medals, whatever. He gets the Stigl guy and he lucks out because Stigl is this jack of all trades, right? He does all sorts of stuff. And so Stigl gets some wins. They build things up. This becomes a real part of the unit. Like, there's an actual cyber thing going on. Stigl taps out, and the guy who takes over has sort of inherited this goose that's laid golden eggs and is full on, golden egg for me time.
Right, yes. Right. He's reaping what someone else sowed.
Yeah, and it's,
in a good way. I mean, the whole thing just sounds like totally alien from my point of view. It's like got the exact opposite of good governance written all the way through it. And it would be just inconceivable for this sort of thing to happen in the organizations I've worked in. Or no.
I feel like they maybe don't have robust oversight.
So, I think it's like they don't have robust oversight, but they've got a lot of vodka.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks, Grugq.